Hello, everybody. This is Bobby Hacker, the Sports Shorts guy, welcoming you to episode 77 of Sports Shorts. My guest today is Jamie Hemann, sports and media consultant, and most importantly, which we're going to talk about a lot today, is the founder of Omegaball. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you. Well, the way we like to start our show for our audience is, first of all, just to talk to us about what it is you're doing now, what your practice is like, the kind of things you're doing, and then to give us a vision of your path, how you got to where you are today. And then we can jump into some nitty gritties about Omegaball. I keep saying that because I'm kind of excited about the concept, and I think we can have a really interesting discussion today about creating a new sport and a new environment across lots of platforms. So before we get there, though, let's talk about what you're doing and how you got there.
Absolutely. So, lawyer by trade, obviously fits into the broadcast. So, I spent about 20 years between ESPN and the NFL as a negotiator in business affairs, working with the NFL Network primarily at the NFL, cutting any kind of deal from talent to operations to distribution, whatever it may be. And that kind of introduced me to the world of sports investing. It actually got me involved with a few clients that I was working with in the agency world that were involved with introducing sports investing to a lot of their athletes. And then that kind of brought me to the last 5 years where I've spent developing and co-founding certain companies, which is where the primary part of my practice resides now, is helping startups launch everywhere from the legal aspect to the business operations aspect, development, fundraising, risk management, everything you could imagine to help set the foundation for creators who have tremendous vision, but they don't necessarily know the instruments or the infrastructure and how to assemble that to launch. And so that's what I've been doing. One of those particular projects happens to be Omegaball. Omegaball, I'm a co-founder with a partner of mine who I've known since my ESPN X Games days over almost 25 years ago now, where he was the head of operations. I was on the business and legal side. We helped grow X Games while we were there to what it is today, which was recently just acquired by private equity. And through that time, learning the business of how to create, how to operate, how to grow a multi-venue, multi-day, multi-sport, new emerging type of interaction with the community, with the athletes, sponsors, everything that goes along with it, as well as distribution. Obviously, our distribution was ESPN at the time. And so that's what kind of evolved our understanding of what we enjoy doing. Anthony Dittman is the founder of Omegaball, and he went on to launch his own staging and operational company with clients the likes of the NFL, Formula One, the USGA, and a variety of large scale events that he now stages. He and I connected about 5 years ago, looking to do something together again. And thus Omegaball was we started incubating the idea. And that's what kind of brings us to today.
Well, that's really good. I'm just curious, and oftentimes law students, especially those who are members of the SLA, want to know how did you get to media? Everybody wants to know how you got these sort of dream jobs that so many people think about. So, you started your career in media at ESPN. Were you in private practice before then, or did you go right to ESPN out of school?
Yeah, my path is probably fairly unique. I always wanted to be in sports. I always wanted to be in law, but I always wanted to be in sports. I didn't know what that path entailed. I thought I was going to hopefully try to do something in-house. When I came out of law school, in-house wasn't necessarily a common role with most sports teams as it is today. And so sports media actually reared its head through some volunteer work that I did with some of the organizers of X Games. And that's how I got involved right out of law school to start with ESPN. My first job out of law school was I was a water boy at X Games in 2001 in Philadelphia. All the while, my dad is like, I co-signed those loans, but your name's on them, so you need to find something that works. It turned out fairly well. I kind of made a place for myself at ESPN where they needed some assistance in the programming department to liaise with the legal department and having that kind of middle liaison voice that understands both sides, and to kind of create some of the negotiations and the language that goes with it, which was unique at that time for ESPN, these owned and operated events. And that's how I kind of created my role. I started, as a freelancer for the first 6 months, and after negotiating about 27 different hotel agreements when we moved the Winter X Games to Aspen, that doesn't have just one solitary hotel back in that day. They realized I'm a very good asset to have. And I kind of created my own job description and became kind of business affairs for ESPN Original Entertainment.
Well, that's a good lesson, which is creating,
Yes.
being creative, not just in terms of how you negotiate, but creating a path for you. And I think it's the same, when you're looking for a job. If you're so focused, you said, I wanted to work in sports, but you didn't have any blinders on. You found a way to get into sports. I'll work with the X Games just to get in somehow. I'll get a job, just sort of freelancing, getting in. And all of a sudden you've created a niche where there wasn't one and have built a career out of it, which is a valuable lesson for, young lawyers or people, any lawyer that wants to get into the sports business, because there's so many things that touch upon what being a sports lawyer might be.
And I would add to that, it's also who you interact with, right? So one of the strong connections I made during my time at ESPN was with Steve Bornstein, who happened to be the president of ESPN ABC Sports at that time. And that's how I was brought to the NFL Network when it first launched. I was reconnected with Steve again, and I created my own role at the NFL Network that did not exist. They did not have a lawyer in-house when they first launched. And so that was how I sold my services to Steve, created my own position again, and worked for 12 years at the NFL Network, creating business affairs. I dabbled in the finance side, the operational side, and a bunch of different roles while I was there.
And so you've taken this path, you're still doing it, working as a lawyer, advising people, doing deals. But based upon a relationship you had with someone, you had an idea, and in this marketplace of every kind of sport, of everything that's imaginable, traditional and untraditional, and, obviously getting your real start in the sports legal business through X Games, which was, at the time very much an outlier, developed into, as you said, when private equity takes it over, I guess it's grown up.
Yeah.
And you have now created a sport called Omegaball. Now, I am not going to explain it, although you've provided me with a lot of information, and we have had a really interesting discussion about it. Can you give us a little view of what exactly Omegaball is, the sport, and then I'm going to dig in a little bit about to the sort of the legal and business development side of it. But why don't you tell everybody what Omegaball is?
Sure. Put simply, Omegaball is a form of soccer. It's a derivative of soccer. It's all the very similar rules. However, the differences we created, it is 3 teams of 5 players each, played on a circular field with 3 goals, each team defending their own goal. And each team can also then score on the other 2 goals. The impetus behind it, of why we created it, was to kind of shake up the left to right of traditional sports, and create much more dynamic movement. And in which case, that's how we came up with the circle. as well as adding the third team and third goal, all with one ball, to kind of create that movement that's a little more chaotic, a little more dynamic. It is not a left to right game. And most importantly, it also creates the ability for each player to be very involved in the game. You are not tied to a position. All 5 players are offense, all 5 players are defense at the same time for each team. And you then now get many more touches with the ball. It improves your quickness, and the size of the field is only half the size of a traditional soccer pitch. So the movement is very quick. It is very fast. And the idea is we wanted to play in a much shorter window. Our game is built for the next generation that wants to see content quickly. They want to share that content in snackable sizes. So our match only lasts 13-minute periods, which fits nicely in a 1-hour programming block for broadcast television. But it is going to be primarily streamed online, that then can be clipped and used on our social media platforms. And we average about 22 goals per those 39 minutes. So once again, it's going to the next generation that wants something more fast, something that's more shareable, more content that they can quickly get in and get out of.
So it sounds like a very interesting game. And when we spoke earlier, what really struck me was, Americans that are we're just really at the front edge of a culture of soccer fandom, where soccer has joined the pantheon of baseball, football, basketball, and hockey. And now you're sort of switching it up to meet the needs of certainly the 18 to 25-year-olds out there who are, looking, as you call them, for those bite-sized amounts of sports. But within that game, you're scoring a lot more goals.
Yes.
And in a traditional soccer game, if there's 4 or 5 goals scored in 90 minutes, that's like, wow, you guys are scoring an average of 22 in, under 40 minutes.
That's correct.
So that makes it a lot more exciting. Now, is it just 5, or is it 5 and a goalkeeper?
It's 5 total, including the goalkeeper. So 15 players, 12 players in the field of play, and then 1 goalie defending their goal.
And so it's really interesting concept, and I thought it was really great. But why don't you talk to us a little bit about how you're going to develop this? Because new sports, part of the development of a new sport is you can play it, but unless you got a deep pocket somebody to sort of build it and put it out there, you have to have someone that's very committed with at least a couple of commas in the bank to develop it. But I think you guys took a really unique and workable approach to how you're going to expand this, because traditionally, take a sport like soccer that, as I said earlier, has now developed into part of the culture of American sports. It took a while because first you had to develop a soccer culture. So you had to develop youth soccer that had to grow into generations of people that understood it and played it with all their other sports, so that now you could have things like MLS or the NWSL that are thriving because you have an audience that it's not a foreign sport to. They understand it. You have now taken a sport that now you have a culture of the sport in America and people understand it. And obviously it's not limited to America because soccer is not limited to America. But you've taken this idea, and how are you getting it out there? And the how are you getting out there is really the interesting story. And I think it's one that speaks to anyone who's trying to develop something new in the sports world.
Yeah, and you've touched on a couple topics there. So you're correct. It's this country is, I wouldn't say it's behind, but it's not pacing as strongly as the rest of the world as it relates to the game of football, which is soccer. We're still probably living off of the advantages of all the stuff that happened in the late 90s with the women's national team, with the men's national team in the early 90s and different things like that. I think the fever pitch is growing and it will escalate to the point of a new era come the World Cup in 2026, and that's essentially what we're building for. There is a timing component to our release that does play into that. And then to your other point about how you build something from the ground up, that is where our expertise comes into play about understanding the sports landscape, but then also understanding how to promote awareness. We used our contacts with television at each of the networks to try to get our game out to as many people as possible. We're in a growth phase right now that includes significant awareness. And so what we're trying to do is get our game most seen and most played as possible before the end of this year, which will then continue to escalate from there. So we debuted on FS2 back in the spring of 2022. We had 2 airings, one of which was a men's game, one was a women's game for 2 1-hour blocks. We were able to cut a deal where we were able to get it on air and have a couple re-airs. Because of the 1-hour programming block, they were able to air it over 75 times in the following year. That distribution gave us significant awareness, not only domestically, but also internationally. It brought attention from ESPN, which then we ended up having a couple games played live on ESPN2. And then it also provided us just access to the rest of the world through other distribution channels, which now brings streaming into play. That is where our focus is. Our focus will be on a streaming platform for our upcoming tour and matches later this year. But it was the awareness that really got us embedded into certain communities all across the globe. So before the end of this year, our sport will be played by youth groups and adult groups on 4 different continents, including the U.S., as well as a number of communities in the U.S., which we will continue to foster and grow. And we're also having our tour stops in those locations as well. So we have worked with certain licensing and marketing deals, which goes into probably one of your future questions on securing certain IP, which was a significant part of my role that we took on early before we went public with the sport.
So as part of that, you're taking all of this experience you had at ESPN and at the NFL Network in licensing and the IP issues that are involved, and then dealing with media partners to try to get the product out there, and did something that most people, I think, fail to realize, because there's a lot of people out there saying, I have the greatest idea. And the greatest idea in paper might be a greatest idea, but until you develop and show a proof of concept, it's very difficult to get people in the media space to go, sure, I'll throw it on the air. But I think what you guys have done is we're able to get that proof of concept out there so that now you had another bidder in taking it to ESPN, for example. And that's a really important lesson. But can you talk a little bit about where the teams are located, how the teams are built out? What's that plan to sort of build out this sport?
Right, and this is unique, where it's not just about the teams. We're actually building an entire sport, every piece of the vertical from the ground up, youth to professional. And so we're focused right now on 2 different aspects of it. So we do have professional showcase matches. We don't have a league yet. We are building to that. But we are doing a professional showcases where that is what our tour will become later this year and all next year, similar to what the Premier Lacrosse League did their first couple of years, where they toured around certain cities, showing the game, creating awareness, impacting and engaging the community that they were in. We intend a similar process this year and next. What that then stems is youth development. And so we have partnered with 4 significantly large, between I would say 6,000 to 10,000 participants, youth participants in each group throughout the United States, that will now begin playing Omegaball in their youth leagues this summer. And we're using that as a catalyst to, once again, create more opportunity for the players to play, but then for more opportunities for the game to be seen and then played elsewhere. That'll eventually grow into the next levels of our growth in terms of the game itself. So taking it from the youth level to then the high school level, the collegiate level, club level, and then it becomes now a professional sport. And that can happen in a very short time period because we're accessing all of those levels at the same time.
Well, it also sounds like what you're talking about is the same way that you developed the underlying sport itself, soccer in America, which is bottom-up approach. It wasn't
Correct.
like you said, "Oh, let me take a bunch of professional players and put them on a field and explain the game." And then people would go, "Okay, well, they're great, and that's a different skill set." But I think the way you're developing on a community basis, on a youth basis, building it up, this now creates sort of an environment where, it's not, to my mind's eye, it's not another question that, the guys on the here in LA on the Galaxy or LAFC are going, "Wow, that would be fun. That would be really interesting to play." And then now you can have professional showcases, and that draws kids in. So you guys are coming at this from a bunch of angles simultaneously, all of which seem to be working for you.
That's correct, and it's working for us on a global level. So we'll have a footprint of games being played in South America, Europe, Africa, and Australia before the end of the year. So each of those creates its own little environment and own community that'll then stem to potentially having a world championship, which is what we're leading up to at both the youth level and the elite level. To your point about others seeing it, that's exactly what is happening. Like within the last couple of weeks, is now we've had a few professional players that are now seeing us because of our activity on social media, as well as our continued repeats on ESPN, that are seeing us and wanting to know more about how they can participate or how they can bring their youth programs into this development as well, as an additional skill set. Right. So the great thing about our game is all the skill sets are transferable to the greater game of soccer. So it is not a competitor. It actually is expanding the funnel of the market size of soccer, which is the largest sport on the planet. And so these are ways that we're helping kind of working in conjunction together. To a certain degree, we are not soccer. We are not governed by anything in the soccer environment because we're a standalone sport. But there are definitely ways that we can help each other.
Now, is your intent to be sort of a sport that's played in the soccer off season, played 12 months a year? Where are you guys on that right now?
Yeah, I think our goal would be to be playing in the soccer off season probably to start until we grab the proper foothold to be able to launch our own league where we can actually participate at the best times of the year wherever our facilities reside. Um, and so that's important for us. Now, the great thing about it is there is a significant supply of quite exceptional soccer players in the U.S. And that's what we've been able to tap into already. But there's not as many opportunities. So I know the USL on the men's side they are growing and they are adding certain levels. NWSL's explosion over the last year has been phenomenal for us because it's creating more opportunities as we build the men's and women's game equally. And so those are great things that are happening that just give us more access to players, very high quality players. We've had some former national team players play in our showcase events, as well as some former MLS, La Liga players. So it's been very good so far.
How are you handling the production part of it? Are you hiring your own crews, or are you using a third party company to come in with a fully developed solution for you? How is that going?
That's been an interesting road. We're using a third party to produce it. However, it's a learning curve. And we've found that those that have the best experience, and we've used multiple crews on several different shoots. Those that have experience in action sports or non-traditional sports have actually fared better in our game because of the dynamic movement and the use of the drone, which is actually probably our best sight line for cameras. And so we've had a mixture of both. They've been shot in different ways. And it's the biggest challenge is finding the best way to show our game and the quick dynamic movement that we have throughout the entire game time, which is certainly unique from the left to right that most are used to.
Well, yeah, I mean, coming from that world myself, I'm just sitting here thinking about you bring a traditional soccer production team in, and how they're positioning cameras and how they're shooting it is pretty much been the same forever. You just may have more cameras and other kinds of cameras and robotic cameras and whatnot. But now it's almost like playing three-dimensional chess.
Yes,
You are you're tracking so many different ways, and you're still only using one ball, right?
that's correct.
So you need people that also have the blinders off with respect to how to produce the content, because you want to get that image. And I like the concept of the drone, because you get better shots and better angles than you could with, static camera placement. But
And
that's all
and
part of the production learning curve as well.
absolutely. And your point about not having blinders is key for us. We the great thing about having and creating your own sport from scratch is we have no rules that you could violate when it comes to production, sponsors, and those kinds of things. We're creating them as we go. Although we have a baseline, we definitely have a more freedom to experiment. So this is another way that we've brought on partners that are looking to experiment with things that they may want to use in more traditional sports, but don't have the capabilities to do that yet, for whatever those reasons may be, because of restrictions. And so now we're able to kind of introduce a lot of new technology, experiment with a lot of new technology, which will be done in our streaming later this year in our tour. And those kinds of things are really what's exciting, about what this could potentially evolve into.
And so if people want to find more about Omegaball, they can go to.
www.omegaball.com.
Well, this is really interesting, and I think one of the things that really strikes me, about our conversation today is you didn't take the most traditional route to get into sports law business. Again, I'm not sure there is one,
Right.
but each of us has our own story of how we got into what is sports, and then you've taken that sports background and taken all of the skill sets you learned, especially I think more so at the NFL Network with the kinds of partnerships and development you did there, built on top of what you learned at ESPN, and you took all of that together and created a different stew that allowed you to put together and start developing Omegaball, which is really interesting. And it's not just in sports; it's in a new sport or a new avenue of sport, and how you've built it out by really developing the proof of concept and getting someone to say, yeah, I'll throw it on TV. And wait a second, maybe I don't have to put it on at 3 o'clock in the morning. Maybe it's good at 10 o'clock in the evening. And for those of you that don't know, I don't care what you do, getting 75 airings is such a home run. I can't even imagine that. It's sui generis, as we say in the legal world. And that's fabulous. And because of that, your slow growth, the way you've been pacing this, really is a outstanding lesson for anyone that wants to get in the business. If you think you're going to step onto the podium at the ESPYS, not happening. Yeah. It's a path to get there, and I applaud you guys on what you're doing, and I look forward to seeing what's next with Omegaball, because I think you've really hit upon something great. And thank you so much for sharing it with us today.
I appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time.
And let's see, one other thing, everybody, you know what this is. It's about the Sports Lawyers Association. And it's now March, so if you didn't renew your annual membership by the end of December, I'm sorry to say that you've probably been locked out for a lot of content. So go to the site, go to Renew Now, and if you're not a member, become a member of the Sports Lawyers Association. And you can take part in all kinds of activities. The next big one, in addition to various outreach events that we hold all across the country that you can find out about on our website, sportslaw.org, is our annual conference, May 9 to 11 in Baltimore, Maryland. And then in November, we'll be having our third fall symposium. And this year it'll have a live element. More on that very soon. But until the next episode of Sports Shorts, I'm going to say goodbye. And again, Jamie, thank you for taking the time to be with us today. It was really a pleasure, and best of luck with Omegaball.